disturbing to people. And they hear from different sources that this is safe, that is safe. But what we have to remind people emotionally, and I think one of the problems we're having, this is more my opinion than a hard fact, but I'll state it anyway. One of the problems is I think a lot of people are very used to going to Google and elsewhere to try to figure things out. And what they lack, and I don't say this with any disrespect, but what they lack is the formality of medical training. They lack the formality of understanding how drugs are produced and the side effects. So the gentleman that you talked about who just got better, it's very encouraging, except we don't know how he got better. We don't know why. And we don't know if he just had a other genetic predisposition in his body to be strong enough to overcome this. Some of the studies that were done in China are very preliminary and they're more observational than not. But if you look at the details, the nitty-gritty details, these people tended to be not as sick as a lot of other people. So to take this and reduce the anxiety that people are having by saying, look, we have this treatment, it's dangerous. And I think what the danger is that until we have it proven, until we have it, some safety, real safety data, that people may be disappointed. Then I worry about this being a very debilitating, destabilizing quality in a lot of people. One of the things that this has brought is that as good as medicine is, and I think a lot of people are frightened about this, as good as we are in medicine, we are far from perfect. And this was an example of what we're talking about. It's a novel virus, it's new, and we're learning how to deal with it. So we'll let the good people, excuse me, we'll let the good people develop it, the infectious disease people, the virologists, the researchers, but psychologically we have to prepare ourselves for what could be a long haul. If it's a short haul, awesome. I'll celebrate with everybody, but it may be long. So we need to look at the fact that people are out of control, they're alone, they're isolated, maybe they're running out of money, they have no contact with their loved ones. It's the obvious having to deal with the situation that we don't know where we're going. Lots of things come up about it, and one of the things that is problematic is that most of the time when there is a disease, the disease often sits with other people, not with us. This is different. So if somebody had, remember the days of HIV when that first came out, and people were afraid to touch them, go to the same bathroom, and so on. But if you had no contact with someone who had AIDS, you were pretty much safe. That's not what it is right now. And even just walking through the store and breathing the air makes us all vulnerable. It becomes psychologically very, very challenging. And I hope that people are finding the strength in themselves to be able to deal with it. So much to talk about this.
If we take it just a step back, just look
Yes.
at the mental health aspect in general. We've heard for a long time that mental health ties in very closely to your immune system function. And in this particular disease, the people who don't seem to do very well are the people with impaired immune function. What's the connection between high anxiety and immunologic function?
It's very high. And one of the really up and coming areas in general psychiatry is the role of the immune system. We know to various degrees, we know that a lot of the psychiatric problems can be, there's a marker called the C-reactive protein. And when people are depressed, when they're anxious, that's high. We don't routinely do that in normal testing because insurance won't pay for it. But in research, they do it. And it shows that when people are calmer, their immunologic system returns to normal. So it's like, how shall I put this? It's like take a rock and take water and go drip, 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 drip on that rock. It's going to be okay for a while, but eventually it's going to make a little track in the rock. And so we have to talk about mechanisms to help reduce the anxiety. Almost all antidepressants to various degrees, and it's a wonderful discussion and gets very technical, but as a rule of thumb, almost everything has an effect on our immune system by making it stronger. Years ago, and I say this just because the thought has been like this for a long time, it was thought that lithium actually increased white blood cell count, which is one of the things that's important in immunologic defenses. It's not as clear cut as we had hoped it would be, but it's a thought. And it was an indicator that our emotions are tied to the rest of our bodies and how they function. So, Dr. Sillinger, you're absolutely correct. There is an overlap. Hence, we need to think about how we can reduce the anxiety, given the fact that a lot of this is quite real. And that's what makes it double the challenge,
Well,
double the challenge.
that's really the question here. Who really needs help? You know, in a situation like we have of all the uncertainty, all the fear it raises, all the economic questions, all the questions as to is this person an asymptomatic carrier, so on and so forth. Is the anxiety warranted? Is this just a normal reaction? When does it cross the line into something that needs an intervention, something that needs to be treated?
We in mental health look at any condition with the term, or with the concept rather, of how is it interfering with the person's ability to function. I very often, well, almost all the time when I see my patients, I'll say, how you doing? How you doing? Are you doing okay? Uh, and we have to also remember that a lot of people in our society have some sort of psychiatric problem before this all started. And we have to get a measure of how they were beforehand, and has it worsened since this occurred? And then if it has worsened, try to identify the elements that, pray tell, they can get some control over. One of the major issues is that there is a lot of people in our society, there are, wrong verb rather. There are a lot of people in our society who are very obsessive about things and they need to control things. And there's no control. This is like, there's just no control. So we have to try to help people figure out ways to control things, give them a sense of strategy to manage it, and recognize, because we can't pretend either, there's a lot that we don't know. So trying not to be too convoluted here, what you said is correct. We have to look at the anxiety, but we also have to not make people feel that they are defective or they can't deal with things because they have anxiety, or they can't sleep, or they can't depress, or they can't function, they're too depressed. It's the mixture of what they were based on what is now, and trying to delineate how much of it is the now and what can we do about it. And sometimes we can do very little other than tell people, yes, we're all in this together. We have to wait. Let's be reasonable and let's do what we can to minimize or mitigate. That's the word they use, to mitigate the uh,
So
the
in
transmission of this
terms of the
piece.
anxiety, you know, you might actually say, you know, why wouldn't you be anxious with what's going on here? Combined with the fact that sometimes worrying will actually trigger problem-solving behaviors,
Yes.
kind of empowering. So maybe a certain amount of anxiety is not a bad thing.
I have a very good friend who is a psychologist in Delray, and I love the way he puts it. He says that, no, these are more my words, I should learn to quote him directly, but that anxiety enables problem solving. We should not look at the anxiety as a mechanism to just fester and do nothing. We should look at it as a drive to try to figure out a way to manage it. Even if sometimes it may be very minimal, but a mechanism not to let the anxiety take control of our lives. It takes a certain ego strength to do it. And sadly, not everybody has it to the same degree as we would like, but we got to try. And we got to help people recognize we'll figure it out, not just to use the word again, to fester. Your point is well taken, sir. Well taken.
So might someone in this midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, might you say that somebody who has no anxiety actually be in denial, which could be considered another type of pathology?
The answer is absolutely yes. We have to ask them why they're not concerned. Now, if they're not concerned because they have a religious or spiritual belief that somehow they're immune from things, that's fine. That's them. And that's a very personal thing that they have to deal with. But if they're in denial, that could be dangerous. And it could be dangerous not only to them, but all the other people that they're exposing themselves to. This is what makes it different. I go to the grocery store and I could be very innocently in line with somebody who is going to infect me, and I don't even have to touch them. And that's where it becomes a little bit more socially complex, if I can use that term. I don't know if I answered your question. I think I went off on a
Sure.
tangent.
I think, of course, each question raises more questions.
Yes.
You referred a moment ago to people who have obsessive traits or a typical OCD patient. Might they actually fit in very well with some of the new social rules, like washing your hands? They might actually become what's considered a very normal person
It
in this
it
scenario.
it seems counterintuitive, but the answer is yes. And many of the more severe germophobics, if that's what they have, I had one guy who, it was unbelievable, and he said, "Oh, I've been living like this for years. This is nothing new." So
He was prepared.
yeah, but I wish in some respects that I could transfer those attitudes and behaviors to other people without it being a dysfunctional element when there's no pandemic. There's the difference. Um, we have to look at what's different now than you were, let's say, in January. And that can be very diagnostic.
So
Dr.
what?
Strauss,
Yes.
this is Nancy Gow, co-chair of the Healthcare Committee, and I, too, sit on the Palm Beach County Alliance for Mental Health Board. I don't think we've ever actually met, but hello.
Hello.
And what about some practical things for our audience, like exercise, meditation, mindfulness, just sitting still for 5 minutes, being aware of your own breathing? I mean, those things can really work well too, right?
They are very critical, and we have to frame it under the notion of what can they do that's safe. Can you take a walk outside? If you're alone and you're not near other people and you're a couple hundred feet perhaps from the nearest people, if getting outside and getting into the air helps you, the answer is yes. My concern is that a lot of people in our society do not know how to do mindfulness stuff. They don't know how to occupy themselves. And these are the people who are at high risk. They live a life that's type A personality, business, 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 or whatever. And all of a sudden, they're having to live very differently. These are the people at high risk. I think the people who understand how to do yoga, I think the people who understand if it's a religious thing, then that gives them comfort, fine. But people should not be alone, and they may have to learn some skills that hitherto in their life they never learned, and they may seem that to themselves that it's silly. They may think that it's silly. It's not. So there's a lot of growing up that has to be done very quickly, and I think the people will, what's the word, separate into different groups. Those who can do that, those who have the mindset to do that, versus those who are hesitant about it, or as Dr. Schillinger said, in denial, like, I don't need to do that. That's for weak people. It's not for weak people. It's for all of us. We are all people, and we are facing something that's just not usual. And I agree with your point. I would love people to do that. Now, how can they learn to do that? Well, if they're lucky enough to have a therapist, or they can go online and read some good literature, I think it's very helpful. The thing that needs to be done is to read the good stuff and not just, it's too much stuff on the internet it's well intended perhaps, but sometimes it's entrepreneurial or it's too biased in terms of particular philosophy. You want regular, proven, middle of the road stuff, so to speak, to try to learn to do this. And it's hard for a lot of people. I could say that 100 times. It's hard for a lot of people. They don't think that these rules apply to them. Now look what's happening. Their rules don't work, and they don't know what to do. And I worry about this, because if they don't reach out to people and get help, then they could be this very large portion that's going to slip away, and maybe they'll start drinking, maybe I don't know, whatever it is, they'll begin to slip away. So what do you see in terms of how people are reaching out to modifying their own behaviors? Are they accepting that they have to modify their own behaviors?
That's
Oh,
a
I'm
good
sorry.
point. I think we can agree modifying the behaviors, deep breathing, meditation, all these things are really excellent first steps. How do we determine as an individual or if a family member or a loved one needs more than that?
It's a matter of their ability to function. It's very helpful if we have the opportunity to speak to family members. So how's your husband doing? Oh, he's not doing well. He's irritable. He's not sleeping. He's eating too much. He doesn't care about his diabetes or whatever. And then hopefully we can convey through the family member that maybe the husband needs to get some more counseling. Now, counseling is a multi-layered thing. There is the sort of counseling that's, yes, we're all going through this together, and that can be very helpful. But then it goes up to the ladder, because a lot of times people, when they start having the anxiety, we uncover deeper things. And as a friend of mine who's another psychologist here in Palm Beach County, she's very concerned that if they're doing telephone work and at the end of the session, the patient will say, oh, listen, you really want to know why I'm anxious? I'm really anxious because, well, I've always been called the ne'er-do-well in the family, and my business closed, and I can just see everybody yelling at me because I can't function anymore and I'm a failure. We just went from a simple thing to a big door, and it needs to be addressed. To go a little bit further, it's the role of psychiatric medicines in all of this. And there's a time and place, but they have to be done prudently. And because these are real situations, and all the benzodiazepines in the world, as a rule of thumb, as we used to say, a pill doesn't turn a bad marriage into a good marriage. However, it's a process, and so that's where we have to be careful about where we go with this and get to know the person. It's not just a rubber stamp for everybody.
So if someone needs to go to the next level, they need professional help, what would be the route to find a therapist?
Hopefully through their physician, the general physician, talk to other people who might be seeing therapists. Go to some of the better sites. Be very careful. This needs to be vetted. National Alliance for Mentally Ill, I don't think they actually list physicians, but I know that different medical organizations do. But don't go to anything on the internet that looks too promising. It may be good. See, that's the problem. I don't know.
And there's a lot of online sources right now. I was just sitting in on a town hall meeting earlier today, sponsored by Bloomberg Business Week, and they had physicians from a couple of groups called Talkspace, Brightside. Have you ever heard of those?
No, but the lots of
There's so
things I
many.
haven't, but it's too many of them. Yes.
So are there enough counselors and therapists to go around?
No.
What I'm concerned with is, okay, we hear the statistics. We're not quite sure how many people actually will be infected with COVID because we're not testing everybody, but it could be, in the millions and millions. Okay. Out of the people who are physically proven to have COVID, 80% have really mild to no illness. Another 20%, some of them very serious, some of them don't make it. That's the physical part of it. What percentage of people who have COVID do you think are going to have emotional issues? And then people who don't actually test positive for COVID, but they may have emotional issues as well. What percentage of our population do you think this is going to affect?
To my knowledge, there is not a hard number, but what we can say, and it depends upon, excuse me, it depends upon who does the statistics, but it's thought that 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 of people in the United States have a diagnosable psychiatric condition. So that's 25%, which means it's probably 30% the way statistics are done. And maybe we could push it to 40% because a lot of them don't get recorded. With this, it would not surprise me, and if I'm wrong, I'll be glad to restate this, but it would not surprise me that 50% of the people are going to feel it one way or the other. The other element here is it may not show up in a pure psychiatric condition. It may show up with fatigue. It may show up with aggravation. and just willing, I can't do this anymore. This is nuts. It's too hard. And I need a respite. And there's no place for the respite. A very articulate patient of mine, about, maybe last week, said that her major complaint right now is that her ability to have distractions are gone. She can't go to the mall. She can't go have dinner with her friends, or even just go to the library. Her distractions are gone. So these are a lot of adjustment issues. And if people become fatigued and it just doesn't end, again, it could drip, 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 drip. It can produce withdrawals, isolations, and then it could slip into depressions, and it can slip into anxiety disorders. It's a very complex sequence. I really do believe that we're going to see a lot of people start to have this.
In terms of the timing, the prognosticators, just like the guys who do that with the maps for the hurricane models, now we have these models for COVID-19. As I mentioned before, they're predicting for Florida, at least, that we're going to see the surge in cases somewhere in the next 3 to 5 weeks. Do you anticipate at some point there's going to be a huge surge in mental health issues?
I do. I'm very, very, very concerned about that. I've spoken to a lot of groups, and right now they're all doing these wonderful things, and they got all of these public service announcements. It's great. It's great. But I'm just wondering what's going to happen when people fatigue. And when they did all these neat things and it was fun and they were thinking of ways to do something, but you know what? It didn't take the problem away. And I just hope we don't lose the good momentum. And that scares me considerably. I'm very worried about that. And as you just said a few moments ago, there are not enough mental health folks. And so we may have to reach out to the clergy. Some clergy are good at it, some not. Teachers, if you have a situation like that, friends. One of the things that is so essential about this is that people cannot feel that they're alone. Now, we are human beings. We are supposed to be next to each other. We enjoy touching each other. If not physically touching, but the touching that occurs from sitting across the table and having supper. And that's been removed. So we're undoing a lot of the things that give us comfort. And that's an issue. And I think people will become worn out by it, emotionally drained. Well, when's this going to end already? When's this going to end already? And that's when we may start seeing an unraveling. And we may start seeing more alcohol. We may see more family dynamics become tense. If the family dynamic was already tense, this may just add to it. And I worry about, in mental health, we don't discuss it enough, frankly, but the whole notion of narcissism. And people who live with people who are narcissistic know exactly what I'm talking about. And we don't treat it. It's hard. It's very hard. And the person who's the narcissist usually doesn't want to do it. So what if a family has a dynamic in which one of the parents is narcissistic, and they finally are sick and tired of this? You know what? I'm not doing without my alcohol. I'm not doing without my walk. I'm not doing without having sex with my partner. I need it now. And it's a combination of immaturity, impulsivity, and self-entitlement and narcissism. What's going to happen when the ability to chill down those tensions becomes less because people are just stuck together? And I hope I'm overextending this. I hope I'm speaking too much, but I worry about it. I really do.
And on a related note.
Brent, can I interject? Nancy
Sure.
Gal?
Sure.
If someone feels like they're not ready to take that big leap into psychotherapy, they're just feeling a little more depressed than usual, or a family member is, or a friend, I would just like to remind everybody that someone else who is always at our monthly board meetings of the Mental Health Alliance, 211.org. It's three simple numbers that they can dial, 211. The operators are there, 24/7, rain or shine. And they will listen to you, whatever it is you feel like talking about. If they feel you need to go to a different level, they will tell you that as well.
I agree. Very good point.
Very important resource. Okay.
Oh, we're getting
Put
off
that up
track.
on the screen. Look at that. Okay,
Yeah, that's
technology
neat.
is working here. Look at that. So, if anyone else wants to jump in, ask any questions. Ken, if you've got any questions, feel free at any point to do that, or we'll just keep
I was
talking.
going to suggest that this is a good point to pause and see if we have other questions, because I know I have quite a few, and Dr. Strauss just started to break into one of them, and that's with the expectation, and we're already seeing evidence of increased domestic violence,
Oh, yes.
increased abuse. I'm a guardian ad litem here in Palm Beach County, and we get to see already that the numbers of calls are starting to creep up because folks are confined, their kids are home from school all the time. Sometimes all the parents are at home all the time. Things are getting tense. But also in another area, Dr. Brett knows, but several of the people on the call tonight are members of the league. And one tendency of league members is to be obsessed with research and study, getting all of the information so that they can be aware and make intelligent choices. And it can evolve into an obsession when you're looking at the 24/7 coverage of death numbers, of the increase in number of cases, on and on and on. Help us. Give us some ideas of how to deal with this.
That's a lot of requests, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've been talking about that with the domestic violence is a big potential issue. It's already showing up, I believe, on a worldwide basis.
The BBC reported a market increase in Britain, and it's a problem. Ken, your questions are extraordinarily valid, and again, Brent and I have talked about this at length. It sounds a little bit like it's idealistic, and maybe I'm trying to paint it with too nice of a stroke, but I tell people, find something to do. Find something you're interested in. Give yourself a challenge. Learn something that you've never learned before. And I know it only goes to a point. I'm aware of that. But I tell people, we've got the internet. Can you imagine going through this crisis without the internet or without electricity? Oh my God, we wouldn't know what to do. So thank God we have that. But on a regular basis, there's a million courses. Take a course in something that you'd never learned about. Learn to cook. Learn how electronics are made. Learn anything so that you have something to do every day that takes you out of just festering. And not everybody's going to be able to do that. And we know that. But maybe enough that it takes some of the tension away. So that at the end of the day, instead of being tense about what I didn't get and this is what I wanted, you could say, I never knew about this and that and that and this. And that can be a wonderful thing to do. I will give you a very quick example. I was curious about the toilet paper thing, and I found a documentary on the history of toilet paper. It was really interesting. And what it left me with is that up until about 150 years ago, human beings didn't have toilet paper, and we survived. Now, it's a completely different thing. But the point is, I learned about it, I discussed it with people, and it was, shall we say, neat. People need to find things to do. And something that will give them intellectual challenge. We have to do that. And you know what it also is, then I'll stop, I'm sorry. People have to learn to entertain themselves and not be entertained. And that's hard for a lot of people.
A great resource that I came across today that can help in that area is something that's put together by a group called the Foundation for Art and Healing. So you might write this down. It's called Stuck at Home. And they have a website where people share how they're using creative arts while in isolation. I mean, how important is the arts? I think
huge.
It can be an important factor.
So let me remind the callers, at the beginning, I asked you to look at the bottom left of your screen and mute your microphones. but please reach over now to the same icon and unmute to ask a question. Now is the perfect time to chime in.
This is Karen. I have a question, I guess, directed to Brent. I'm one of those people who couldn't find good material to make a mask, so I cut up one of the HEPA filters for my vacuum cleaner. Is that a preferred fabric to use if you're trying to make a mask? And in terms of how long is a mask good for? Should it be only single use or?
Well, those are all good questions that we don't really have solid answers for, because it seems to be changing, if not on a daily, certainly on a weekly basis. And now we're kind of getting this directive from the CDC, but not from the World Health Organization, about how we should be wearing masks all the time when we're out in public. So I think for what you're talking about, any type of material that covers the nose and the mouth can be very useful. It's useful largely in the fact that if you were sneezing, that the droplets will not leave your nose and mouth and go into the air. They'll be pretty much trapped by that fabric. But probably more important, no matter what fabric you use, it's going to keep your hands away from that part of your face. Because if your nose and your mouth are covered, you're not going to be able to reach it. So that's probably one of the most useful things for the mask. And you know, how long can you use them for? You know, nobody's really tested that. We have the masks, the N95 masks, which are the very high-end ones that we use as part of the protective equipment. There's been such a shortage that I've heard about people using them for a couple of weeks at a time. They're usually supposed to be used for no more than like 6 to 8 hours. And I guess they seem to be working. So it's difficult, but I think, you know, on a consumer level, any type of thing you put together like that, certainly what you're talking about sounds very sufficient.
This is Marcia Halpern. A lot of the stuff I've read about it says that cotton is the best fabric to use, a woven fabric, a couple layers. The HEPA filter is good, except they say it's hard to breathe with it. And if you're using cotton, you can throw it in the washing machine when you come back in the house. You have to wear it to go to the store. You come home, throw it in the washing machine, hot water, spray it with alcohol, and then you reuse it.
It sounds reasonable. I think you certainly want a material that's comfortable enough that's not going to irritate the skin on your face, and comfortable enough that you're going to want to wear it.
Let me ask you a question, Brent. This was someone asked me, and I'm going to chime into you being a dermatologist. If someone sneezes on me and the COVID is on my skin, is that necessarily dangerous, or does it have to get into our body through one of our portals?
Well, there is nothing that shows that it can penetrate intact skin. The problem is if they sneeze and it gets on your hand or your arm, and then you go and you scratch your face, you'll transfer it. If you had open cuts on that skin, I guess it's possible that it could penetrate if it was like an ulceration or something like that. But that's the whole question about the gloves. How important is it to wear gloves? The gloves aren't going to be real useful unless you wash your hands when you take the gloves off, and don't go touching your face while you have the gloves on. There was a shot on Facebook of a gentleman who was in line at Walmart checking out at the cashier, and he was wearing gloves, and he had an open bag of potato chips from which he was eating potato chips with the gloves on. So it's you got to put it in context. But it's not going to, from everything we know, it does not penetrate intact skin. What's troubling to me is a lot of things that we've been given advice on, a week or two later, somebody says, well, maybe there's an exception to that rule. You know, we heard that it's only older people who have comorbidities. Now we're finding a fair number of younger people who are totally healthy becoming severely ill. So it's a challenging thing. Nothing is 100%.
I have a question for Dr. Strauss.
Yes.
Can you give us some idea or explanation why it's so difficult for some people to adhere to the guidelines? What causes them to be so dismissive of the guidance that we receive?
There are a lot of personality issues that we don't discuss. There's a lot of entitlement. There's a lot of arrogance. There's a lot of denial. And we could look at it from one of two sides. Either they are so frightened that they have to ignore it because they'll become immobilized by their own fears. And so they put on a front, but indeed they're very, very fragile. If you would, so to speak, scratch the surface, you'll see just how scared they are. But there are a lot of people, and we've discussed this extensively, who are disbelievers because they just don't, it's a conspiracy theory, or they're saved by their religion, or they're not going to give up pleasures because of something that is has a political bent to it more than the average person might accept. I know I'm not giving you the hard answer that I wish I could give you, but it's either some people are just so comfortable denying things. I knew a guy years ago, who said nothing bad will ever happen to him. And he made a lot of money, and he had a lot of girlfriends and a lot of cars and all this. It didn't matter what we say to him because he had this arrogance about him. So these are personality issues. And in a time and place where it's not dangerous to other people, we can pretty much ignore it. Not now. And that's the difference. Now it's a public health issue. And we've had people come to my office and they say, I want to see the doctor. And my secretary says, no, everything's by television. But I'm not infected. How do you know that? It's, again, it's the arrogance or the narcissism, the cockiness, or it's the flip side that they just can't even get near the fact that they could be sick. So you have to inquire and explore. And this is not just a rubber stamp answer. It bothers me very much when I hear about people going to the beaches. I just want to scream. And again, I know I'm being a bit redundant, but their party time could cause me to be sick or someone of my friends or my family. This is absurd. This is irresponsible. And, you know, we have to be very careful here because the league is not political, and I respect that. But a lot of it has to do that a lot of people just see this thing differently politically. And you never, I shouldn't say you never, we don't have that much control, but it's always intriguing to me if people have completely different political positions on this and how they interpret it. That could raise a lot of tension. So I find it disappointing. I find it sad that people are willing to ignore what solid medicine shows is dangerous for their own pleasure. There's another term for that. It's called hedonism. They just could be hedonistic. And it's a problem. We don't discuss this enough in the general community. They'll say, oh, he just likes the way it is. Now, you can't write it off.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
I live in a, you know, it's a different story when you live in a condo building.
Yes.
Because it's like a little petri dish with the elevators and the door handles and the common places and spaces. And so the board has really cracked down, but there are still people who are violating the rules. So it does become takes it up a notch, so to speak, when you're in communal living. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hedonism out there. And one of the things that comes up occasionally, you'll hear it in the courts, where a woman will have sex and not tell, or it could be the other way around. One of the partners has HIV and doesn't tell the other partner. Yeah, your head shake it captures it. And so this is an opportunity perhaps, and I hope that it does work, for our society to grow up a little bit and for our society not to forget when this is all over what we went through, and hopefully be a little bit more responsible for each other. That would be just, given everything, that would be just wonderful. I just hope it works. I just hope it works. So, good question.
It's a time where the common good has to take precedence over our individual desires.
Yes.
So Dr. Strauss, I can't help but think that as we have conversations like this, we have particular people in mind based upon the old normal. And what we're seeing today are folks who were adequately financed because they had dual incomes, all the bills were paid and everything. And now all of a sudden, both family members are unemployed, waiting to start receiving some of the resources through unemployment or the stimulus package, but may not become employed again. It's not just the stress of the pandemic, it's also the stress of this new normal life. I don't know when am I going to find another job? The news about the economy is so overwhelming. What can we offer to them as far as resources to address their mental well-being?
Your question is solid, and we don't have an easy answer, because the reality is that if they don't have enough money to go buy food, all the counseling in the world is not going to help that now. So we have to find some mechanism to give them hope. That's hard when you're hungry. That's really hard to do when you're hungry. But the notion that there is still a market, it's not like factories are destroyed in a hurricane. The factories are still there. The market is still there. It will take some time to pull it up. We need for them not to have a sense that there is no future. But again, if you look at history, and this is a great time to study history, because it's not the first time a society has been challenged like this,
Correct.
is to see that a lot of people, unfortunately, will commit suicide or will result in drinking as much as they can, or there'll be all sorts of legal problems. So we need to let them know, yes, we understand. We really understand that you're in trouble. Now, one of the things that I tell people, and sometimes they look at me and say, really, you're telling me to do that now? I go, yeah, I am, is that when this is all over, I want you to become more of an advocate. I want you to become more of whatever it chooses, mental health, save the environment, political, I don't care what it is, so that you are not so much the lackey at the end of the chain who is so dependent on everybody else. Become more independent. Learn a new skill, because the market is still there. We still need people to build houses and make food and run computers. It's hard, sir. I guess I'm just going in a big circle, but it's really hard to get people to maintain that. And what I fear is that, and we have to be very careful about how we do this politically, that we don't build up false hopes, because ultimately people are going to have to do it by themselves. Now, that being said, we try very hard to help them not lose the focus. And I'm sorry, that's a vague answer in some ways, but I can't give you a specific. You know, a lot of it's common sense. And part of that is don't be alone. Don't be alone. Talk to your friend. And our society, pray tell, will change in a good way. Not much of an answer.
It was a good start. All of the answers can't be provided right now anyway, because we don't know where this journey is going actually. But we have about a minute and a half. Are there any more questions from any of the other participants? Now is your time.
I just have one comment, if I could. I'm encouraged by some of the resiliency I'm seeing in some of my friends. We tend to bolster each other up. We're having the Zoom cocktail hours, the Zoom coffee clutches, where I participated in 3 webinars today. I'm, thrilled that our local resources like I'm an environmental group for the league, and the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute is now holding webinars, web chats, where scientists are talking to you about their interests, what they pursue there, how they work. It's a fascinating sliver of silver lining, if you will, in terms of recognizing the opportunities that are out there that most of the time we never take advantage of because we're so busy with the day-to-day. And it may help that, I'm an only child, so I grew up learning to entertain myself. And so I find that to be a resource right now. But the opportunities are there, and I think that people will dig down sometimes and find that inner strength they need to get through this.
Agreed.
I'm finding that in a lot of my friends.
Very good there, Mary. And so, doctors, I've got two slides I'd like to put up and ask that you offer any insights as you can about the resources that Nancy has shared with us for tonight. The first one is this one, Brent. Anything else to add to these available resources for?
For the testing, there's another number also for the South County. Okay, which is let's see if we have that one there. The 84002. No, I have 8040250. Okay, which is for the one in the South County. Okay. And the other numbers, I'm looking, squinting at this here. I think that's a good start.
Okay, and thank you. And let me stop that share and do another one for you, Dr. Strauss. This one, I think I put it up earlier. I'm just not sure.
Oh, the Falk Center and something else?
Yes.
Yes.
Anything else you can think of to add as a community resource?
Well, the Mental Health Association, the NAMI, National Alliance of Mentally Ill, their national sites and local sites, but the American Psychiatric Society, American Psychological Society, they have the same initials, so sometimes it gets confusing. The Florida Psychiatric Society state has a COVID resource center, and the only thing that I would ask people to do is when you go to one of these sites, like the Falk Center is a wonderful facility. Thank God we have that program. But there's the South County Mental Health Center. Just look at it a little bit more in depth and make sure that what you're going to get is what you're looking for. And what will it really cost or not? Is it free? Is it not free? How limited is it? All those types of things. There are plenty of facilities, but the Falk Center is good. Again, the big ones in our county are the Mental Health Association, which is up in West Palm Beach, and National Alliance for Mentally Ill, and they have an office in Lake Worth. Excellent starting points.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I'm box myself up against the time wall now, so I'll try to do it without talking too fast, but there's, for both of you doctors, thank you from one of our participants there. She's really good with signs too. She's got excellent penmanship and everything.
Good. My pleasure. My pleasure.
But thank you all for joining us. Just a reminder, this is a regular conversation that will occur every Wednesday at 6 p.m. and last for 1 hour or less. Each call will include a medical update from our medical expert, Dr. Schillinger. We'll also be examining other impacts on our community here in Palm Beach County. Next week, we'll be discussing how the $2 trillion stimulus will help us here in Palm Beach County. Our guest for that call will be Congresswoman Lois Frankel. She'll be joining us next week. During future conversations, we plan to examine scams and cons that are taking place concurrent with this pandemic, because there are always folks out there happy to separate us from our money. I'm also looking for suggestions for other calls. Please feel free to email me, Ken Thomas, at ken.lwvpbc @gmail.com with ideas and suggestions for other topics to coincide with our medical update. I'd like to thank you again for joining us and thank Dr. Schillinger and Dr. Strauss for their insightful information. Please join us every Wednesday at 6 as we engage with our neighbors to travel this journey through this crisis together. I ask that you also think of someone who isn't on tonight and share the contact information so that they can join us at future calls. I believe this information will help us get through this together. I'm Ken Thomas, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Palm Beach County and our Healthcare Committee, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
I love seeing your face, Ken.
Thank you. Especially as I get closer and closer, right?
I know.
But Dr. Strauss, thanks again for joining us, sir. Oops, keep missing it.